Hello, listeners and viewers. Apple Treats episode 8 is here with myself, Arina, Danis, and our guest, Stuart Breckenridge, active open source contributor. So, welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Hi guys. So before we begin, and we will talk about the open source contribution, and probably we will talk a little bit about the NetNewsWire project itself. So before we start, Stuart, could you please give us some intro about yourself? So how did you end up being iOS developer, and how you joined the NetNewsWire team?
Okay, so back in 2007, when I finished university, I bought my first Mac, and then I still didn't touch programming for a couple of years, and then in 2009, I bought my first Objective-C book, and I started picking up Objective-C from there. In 2010, for various reasons, I switched jobs. And I had a sizable commute from where I was living to where I was working in the morning and the evening. So I felt that when I was on the train, I could put that time to some good use. So that's when I started iOS development and buying more in the way of iOS books. So Big Nerd Ranch Guide, several of those on the iOS side. From there, I started building some small apps. Very basic apps, pick your lottery numbers, flag quiz for my nephews, and from there, from 2010 onwards, the apps got a bit more complex. So I started building servers to go with them to do push notifications, and then when I got to Singapore in 2013, I started building apps that plugged into the Land Transport Authority's API. And again, that was all Swift at that point. I got here in 2013, started building it in 2014. So I got on the Swift bandwagon very early on Swift 1. Then rewrote my apps in Swift 2 the next year, which was painful. And that was how I got into it. When it comes to NetNewsWire, I picked that up. I joined that team in 2019. Okay, so I've been doing it for about 10 years.
It already was an open source project when you joined the team.
Yes, it was. So Ren announced it that he was developing an open source app for RSS in 2017, and at that point it was under the name Evergreen. And there's a long history behind NetNewsWire. It goes way back to 2002, and the name and brand assets came back to Brent around about 2018. So the app that he had been developing became NetNewsWire, and the community around it was obviously growing at that point from a developer support perspective. And even now, there's been more than 60 different contributors to the code base. So it's got a very vibrant community.
And can open source project develop spontaneously? Does it need a formed team or some methodology to organize the job, or it can be something independent?
So my background is project management. So there's no formal description I would give to the way that NetNewsWire is structured. I would say that Brent is the product owner, so most of the major decisions would go through him. Morris deals with the iOS development largely, and everyone else is essentially an individual contributor. They can come in, pick up an issue, work on it, and as we get closer to release, Brent will start pruning things down to say that this has to hit the milestone. But because it's voluntary and it's everyone's spare time, there is not the same level of corporate deadline that you would have in a larger organization.
Right. But even without the methodology, well, if you are working as a team, you probably need some ways of communications. And well, I believe your team is kind of like distributed team? I mean, in terms of time zones and everything. So how do you communicate?
So we use Slack as our primary communications tool. But we receive tickets from obviously TestFlight, and Brent will put them in GitHub for us. Users are free to join both the GitHub group and the Slack group, discuss issues, discuss tickets. And in terms of time zones, yeah, it's difficult. So I think I've been working on it since 2019, and I've only spoken to Brent on Zoom once in that amount of time. So it is fairly distributed, but there's a lot of active chat on Slack, which is where most of the issues are discussed.
Right, but do you think that's efficient enough? I mean, like, do you want to have more like live conversation, or is like do you think that's enough for this kind of project?
I think it's enough for this kind of project. As I said before, there's no deadlines on NetNewsWire. Brent is very clear on that, so it's not a corporate project. There's not scope, time, quality, cost that you have to care about. You just have to, you pick up issues, you work on them. As we get comfortable that our release is solid enough, we begin to narrow things down, and then it gets closer to release, and then it's out in the wild. Yeah.
Okay. And can you like describe? Is it actually a team, or it's like more of individual contributors? Because from what you've said, it looks more like everybody just picks up something and doing that. And do you consider like NetNewsWire as a like formal team or like informal team?
I think it would be closer to informal, because people can drop in and drop out, and there's no demand on them because it's volunteer, it's free time. It's not formal. There's no stand-ups. You don't have product owners. You don't have scrum masters. You don't have anything along those lines. So yeah, I think informal is a fair description.
Do you have any kind of, team buildings, or, at least like, do you think like the morale of the team is like, is fine? I mean, how would you describe that?
I think, from my perspective, given the situation that we've all been in for the last year and a bit, working from home, I have found working on NetNewsWire in my spare time to be a good distraction from what's been going on. And certainly when I've spoken to team members, everyone is, when I speak to them in Slack, and when I've spoken to them on Zoom once or twice, everyone seems to be in good spirits with what's happening around the world, which is good. But there's no friction that you would say that would come out from the work that we're doing. Seems to be happy working on what is a voluntary project.
Right, and even with the like happy team, sometimes I believe that like there could be some disputes on decisions or like architectural things. How would these arguments be resolved in NetNewsWire?
It's a good question. I would run an idea. So on the work that I've done, where there's maybe one or two options that we could progress with, we would talk things through on Slack. And certainly some of the work that I'm doing now is around about messaging for CloudKit delays and how we would present that to a user. So when there are various options, I would normally talk it through on Slack and then take it to Brent. And given that he is project managing it, he is largely the product owner. The final decision would stop with him, and that is the way it should work in most projects. There has to be a decision maker.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Makes sense. Yeah. And does open source project, mobile person's project differ somehow of other projects? Does it have some specifics like connected with a Apple developer program, or maybe you need to form it in a package or pod?
So there are differences to the way it's managed from your own projects. So we have everybody working on it on their local copies. When it and because of that, they all have their own signing certificates, and you can't have the same bundle ID, for example, across all the developers that are trying to do their local builds that don't have a shared certificate amongst them all. So we, on the NetNewsWire project, did something that I hadn't seen before. So there's a concept called shared Xcode settings, and you set up that file at the same level as your project. And when that launches, or when your project launches, it takes in all the settings from that file, so you can get a sort of a pristine local copy, as we like to call it, of the NetNewsWire project. It's configured to your code signing certificate, your developer ID, and it gives you your bundle ID as well. So you can build it, run it, and that just does not interfere with the shared Git history of the distributed open source team. So that's like one example of how we have to do things differently. Whereas if you were in an organization, you'd all be working off the shared enterprise developer account.
Okay.
As an example.
If we talk on the open source contribution, before we move on to the general questions here, why did you decide to join the NetNewsWire? I mean, what it's I mean, what are your benefits from doing this? I mean, you're spending your time on this, and like having the day job. It's also like you're doing like twice the job, probably in some ways.
Well, I don't see it that way. If I was doing twice the job, I'd be doing project management during the day, then coming home and doing project management at night, which I think would probably make me hate project management in the end. So coding is probably a little bit of an escape from the day job. So I think, sorry, I've lost my train of thought completely. Yeah, so I see coding as a bit of an escape from my day job.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's kind of interesting.
And sorry. To your point of sorry, I just recalled my train of thought.
No.
To why I joined the NetNewsWire team. I wanted to sort of get out of my comfort zone with the projects I had been working on. And NetNewsWire is both a Mac app and an iOS app. So I did get a bit of experience of AppKit in very small ways. And then last year, with the second revision of Swift UI, we had a lot of fun in the summer last year. Form versions of NetNewsWire. So in about 4 to 6 weeks, we had a working version of the app on both iOS and macOS using broadly the same code base. And that was really good fun to work on. So it was more to get me out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, and it's actually quite interesting. I mean, the project itself is like it's using a lot of Apple's technologies there. Like now there is an iCloud sync, which is like getting to the iOS. I believe it's in test flight now, or it's already released. I can't recall now, but it's getting there, and the user interface is also like following the guidelines in all ways. And so for those who are interested in like building the nice user experience, probably this project is something to look for. I mean, I'm kind of a long-time user of NetNewsWire, and like when the iCloud sync appeared, I switched from Feedly to that, and quite happy. Again, having less dependencies on the third-party tools to manage the streams. So, from your perspective, if somebody wants to start contributing to any of open source projects, what would you recommend them to start with? I mean, like, how to how to start doing some open source?
So even in the iOS ecosystem, there's a lot of open source projects available to work on. You could work on Brave, you could work on Firefox, you could work on Signal. They're all open source. The way that I got involved with NetNewsWire is probably a reasonable way to go. Just pick some small issues that you think you can work on, talk to the team that are currently there, ask for guidance, and then take it from there. And as you progress on, you'll have the confidence to build up and work on bigger things.
Right. And do you think that you need to do something in terms of like getting some specific knowledge working with the open source, or like specific practice in some way, or it's just like you just need the like the passion to do that, and that's probably you will be able to accommodate to any kind of open source projects?
Passion is important. More important is learning about source control, and especially Git. You don't learn about source control from the Objective-C book. You don't learn about it from iOS programming books. It's an incredibly difficult tool to use on your own. But when you've got a branching strategy already in place on an open source project, you have to make sure you're getting it right when you're putting in your first pull request. Otherwise, things can go off the rails very, very quickly. So I think source control is one, and certainly being able to work in a team is also very, very important. You can't just go lone wolf on an open source project. You'd be as well to fork what you're doing and just run with it yourself.
Right. And if we look from other perspective, your like project manager background might help here. So do you think that like what could be the recommendations for those who want to start their project and make it open source? Is there something like you need to look into or think about before, or if you have a project and you want to make it open source, so do you need to think about something before doing that, or again, it's kind of simple decision?
I suppose it depends what you're building. So NetNewsWire is obviously a very, very big open source project. I have tried on my own to build open source projects, but it's very hard to get a community around it if it's just something that's tickling your itch. So I think you have to build something useful, something that would be popular and has a lot of utility in order to get a sizable open source community around it. And I think you need to be out there with your messaging, your own personal blog. You have to be very, very active on social networks to get a sizable community around you to follow your work and get involved.
Right.
Okay, so that means that open source project does need marketing and some advertisement and work with to make it like available to end users, them to able to find it, or it could be like you just released it, published, and popularity came by itself.
Yeah, I think posting a blog about what you're doing is marketing in a way. It's not paid for advertising, but it's certainly a way to get the message out. And then you do have the sort of organic ways where a repository could become popular through GitHub stars and take that route. But I do think some marketing is involved in any open source project.
Yeah, and speaking of NetNewsWire, I mean, it seems that the RSS itself is not too much of the. I don't know. I mean, like my opinion might be like I'm looking from the developer's perspective, and RSS looks for me like more for the developers rather than for regular users. Do you have any insights on who are the users of NetNewsWire, or it's just like everybody uses RSS and well?
I think it's probably a fair comment that it's more technically minded people that do use RSS. And certainly now that most browsers have taken RSS out of their core functionality set, so you can't use RSS in Firefox or Safari anymore. I'm not sure if you can use it in Chrome. It has become a bit more of a niche. But I do think it's still got a fairly wide user base, because the ecosystem for good RSS apps is very, very strong at this point. Beyond NetNewsWire, you've got Unread, you've got Reader, and they're all very, very good. So I think there is still some level of popularity among general users outside of the technical user base.
Yeah. Well, we all know that just in a couple of weeks, WWDC is starting. So, do you have any expectations, or maybe you have your own wish list for something which Apple might show there?
Yeah. So I think they've put the M1 in the iPad. They now actually have to. I think they have to make a big step forward with iPad OS. At the moment, they're saying it's 50% faster, but 50% faster at doing what? Does it mean that they're bringing more professional coding tools, some sort of version of Xcode to iPad? I'm not so sure, but I do think for what they've put in it, they have said it's there for future capacity. But I think they really have to make a step forward with it now, because it's got the same feature set as last year, same hardware, look and feel. It really does need to take a step forward in terms of software.
Yeah.
Other than that, I think Xcode could do with some performance improvements, particularly for compiling Swift projects. I would like to see an end to indexing, just spinning away in the top bar. And I think if you go back and you look at how fast Objective-C projects used to compile, or still compile, Swift has still got some way to go in Xcode.
True. Do you think that they might show something which could be useful for like NetNewsWire in the future? And again, speaking from that, so you're already looking into Swift UI. Do you from your perspective, how much time will it take to get a feature into production apps? For example, like NetNewsWire, from the time it was announced, or maybe you have some like internal stats on that.
So, you mean in terms of how fast we go from like a WWDC feature to something being in NetNewsWire?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we said at the start we don't have deadlines.
Yeah, sure.
So if it's something small, say like the background task framework, that's something that we can slot in fairly quickly. Other things like say WidgetKit from the last WWDC, that's still in test flight for us in iOS at this point, and it will be part of the next release. But I don't have any stats on how long it takes a feature being announced at WWDC for us to implement it, because it really does depend on what it is.
Yeah, I'm like, again, speaking from the developer perspective, you're integrating the iCloud sync to the NetNewsWire to macOS and iOS apps. Do you see that iCloud is now like ready for production projects? Because, well, I had some experience before, and when I could not remember exactly, I believe it was iOS 5 or 6 when they announced like core data with iCloud, and that wasn't ready for any kind of, let's say, production experience, but like it got better with each release. So, and I heard a lot of talks that like iCloud is too simple or too young to be ready for anything for the production use. And do you think it's now ready and it's mature enough to be used widely?
From our experience so far, where we have seen the biggest issues are where people are doing mass migrations from maybe what you did from Feedly to iCloud, and you're moving a lot of feeds over in one go. In those types of situations, CloudKit can throttle you, and it can throttle you for quite some time. So you'll see a progress bar just going forward and forward and forward very, very slowly. Sometimes we've seen reports of it taking days to do a full sync of feeds when you're doing a bit mass migration. After that, it does tend to work fine for most people. So I think unless you're doing a really huge migration of data, CloudKit is probably okay at this point. I honestly, I don't have much experience of core data in the cloud. I haven't heard tremendous things about it, but I've never used it personally.
Right. Yeah. Well, they changed the API and was like initially just the core data. Then they got UI managed document, which was kind of the similar. Then now they have persistent container with the CloudKit support. So you basically like design the core data model and it syncs to core data by itself or to iCloud by itself. But okay, yeah, well, that's interesting. And as an Apple user, do you hope to see something on in the new iOS releases, or like maybe anything unusual?
I think I personally would like to see developers get access to more of the public transport maps that are available that Apple use. For a long time, it's just been Maps exclusive, and I would like to have access to it so that I don't have to dip into an entire data set from the Land Transport Authority and build up train routes that Apple already have available. So I would like to see that. And I think there's going to have to be some changes to the App Store, just based on what's going on with Epic and that particular lawsuit. Apple don't look particularly good out of it. I think developers are going to have to see something there, because what Apple have put in place with the small business program it's a step in the right direction, but I don't think it's enough based on the current reputation that they're getting out of the Epic suit.
Yeah, it might be. And yeah, before we wrap up, maybe you have any, I don't know, funny stories from the NetNewsWire development, something you could share? Or just interesting stories?
I think when we did our Swift UI work, that was a lot of fun because none of us had done it with that amount and in that volume and at that speed. So we had a lot of different interpretations of how to use state object, how to use observed object, and what coding styles to follow. And it was quite fun to start putting together the coding guidelines for Swift UI. And I assume it's all going to change in about a month's time with whatever happens in Swift UI 3. But yeah, I think because we're so distributed and we don't get too much time to talk to each other, it's not really the same as being in an office environment where it's there's more chance for jokes.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. That was an interesting talk for us, and I hope you inspired somebody to join the open source, and well, maybe you will see somebody joining the NetNewsWire team as well.
Yes, hope so.
We will add links to the project. to the episode.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Stu, for joining. I'll give a star at least, and maybe contribute the star.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Irina. Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, and for those of you who are listening and watching us, we will be back in 2 weeks, and in between you can share the episode, maybe tell somebody about the podcast, and yeah, see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.